When it comes to VST instruments, the main ones that I use are 5 different ones. And today I want to go over them and talk a little bit about when I use each one and what they're good for. Because I think a lot of people think that, okay, if you just get a synth, say Serum or Vital or Faceplant, then you're going to be set. But having multiple of them and having them for different situations is probably better. Because as you can imagine, each VST is going to have a strength that allows it to make sounds that other synths maybe cannot make, or make faster by having a certain kind of workflow that just speeds it up in a certain way. Whatever it ends up being, I am of the belief that having multiple main synth VSTs is still very powerful. What you are going to see is that I don't really use them though. So when it comes to my products, what you'll see is that most of the synths are actually going to be Serum. So it's either going to be Serum version 1, if it's like an older synth in there, or now in some of the newer synths, if I go through here, we can probably see Serum version 2 starting to show up. We can see a little Vital here, which is interesting. But yeah, here we have the first Serum 2. And of course, Serum 2 is now going to take over as my main synth from Serum 1. So really, my main synth has been Serum for the longest time. And that's because I do think that having a synth that you know really, really well and that you can basically do anything in is still a good thing. And that for me is Serum. I like its workflow, I like its sound, I like how intuitive it is in setting up things like modulations and LFOs and whatnot. I like that it's not too finicky to modulate anything. One of the things that I really don't like about Vital is how finicky all of this stuff here is, and all of the individual things that you have to hover over and whatnot. This particular patch doesn't do anything too complex, but if you have, for example, modulating amounts that modulate other things here, that can become a problem as well, and that becomes really finicky to edit them and see which one is which. And as you can see, you now have set a different range here. I want this back to where it was, which was almost up here. But I really like the drag and drop modulation that we have, and the fact that you're only really seeing the modulations and editing the modulations that you have selected. So for example, right now I cannot edit the modulation that is happening on this filter cutoff because it's set to note on random. In this case, there isn't really anything that you can click that is a note on random, so you do have to go in here and then make changes to individual sliders here. But even that is, in my opinion, it is so fast, it is so good that that is okay. So all of those things are really important to consider when you're thinking about your main synth, which synth is the workflow that you like most. And in my opinion, it's just a good investment if you really start learning it, really find, you know, hundreds of different tricks that you can do in that synth to create different sounds and to create different ideas. Now, something that I've recently done, which you may have not noticed on my channel, is that I've actually put some affiliate links in the description. This is just another way that I want to optimize the channel a little bit, and I want to maybe generate a little bit more income from it. But if you're interested in music production plugins and tools, make sure to check out those affiliate links to see if there's anything interesting for you. And if you do make a purchase, then of course I get a little bit of a kickback. So thank you very much if you do so. The second VST instrument that I would recommend that you have is something that does real world sounds very well. I'm trying to find my Omnispheres here, but here you can see Omnisphere is definitely that for me. It is really good at real world sounds and that kind of stuff. So for example, where I have the flute, that is obviously coming from Omnisphere. This is Calliope of my dreams. I don't know how to pronounce that word, but you guys know that I don't know how to pronounce things, so that's okay. But this is the flute that makes this sound. And Omnisphere is just a really nice collection of those real world sounds and that kind of stuff. It is also really good for stuff like atmospheres and anything that you don't really want to sound design yourself. In this case, I am doing some more complex stuff with it, which is not something that I normally do. But going into this Omnisphere, let's see what it's actually doing. We have 4 different levels, which I'm assuming I'm doing. Oh yes, okay, so I'm doing multi stuff here. So what I've done is I've loaded up 4 different presets, and then I'm automating the levels between them. And you can see I have written in an automation for that. And then we have some macros and effects, I guess, here with the morph. I wonder what I'm doing here. I have different FFT morphs set up. Yes, okay. Cool. So this sound, a lot of the modulation that you can hear is actually coming from all of the different macros here and the different dry wets for all of these 4 channels. And essentially what we have over here is this like spectral remapper, which is this morph plugin that is making sure that we get some of that atonal quality through it. Honestly, I'm explaining this like this is some kind of patch that I'm explaining for a video. That's not really important. The important bit is that Omnisphere is responsible for creating the input atmosphere that is then going through everything here. And honestly, I don't think that this is doing too much. What Omnisphere is also really good for is vocals. So if I ever need like a vocal pad or like a vocal stutter or something like that. In this case, I have a melody that is layering up with the flute, like very low here. Nice big choir sound here. Another Omnisphere next to it. This is also probably going to be like a vocal pad thing. This is more for like that dark kind of raspy texture if you get a really low octave. And then the final thing that I'll show is some final real world instruments, which would be probably this flute over here. I believe this is also flute, right? Yes. So that's a nice flute sound there. And then we have this sitar. I mean, there's technically some glitchiness happening after this, but the main sitar sound is still very realistic and it's still coming from Omnisphere. It is not just made for realistic sounds. If I go through some of the presets and I go through all the categories here, you can see that there's a massive amount of preset categories. And anything that you want, basically, there's like ARPs and sequences and just basic synths to very complex stuff to very specific stuff like all of the bold colors is really nice because you can turn that into big, like almost slightly atonal atmospheres. If you're into dark side and you hate creating those kind of atonal atmospheres, then the bold colors is definitely a way to do that. And the main way that I use Omnisphere is I don't really ever sound design in it. I just browse the presets. And to be honest, I don't think I'm ever going to run out of presets. I've noticed myself once or twice using the same presets in different tracks and for different purposes. Even like having the same preset twice in the same track has happened to me once or twice. And that means that I've always had a little bit of a feeling that I shouldn't overuse Omnisphere, but the ease with which you open up some really inspiring sound out of it is just unmatched with anything that you need to make on your own. And doing it through preset browsing is, you know, just quicker and it just gets the ball rolling for musical ideas quicker. So honestly, those are my main 2 synths that I tend to use for basically all of the sound design in my tracks. As I said before, there was like a Vital in here that was really confusing me a little bit because I normally don't use it so much. But Vital would be the 3rd synth that I would use if I need a very specific tonality. And that is because I've always associated Vital with very wet, micro detail, complex sounds, if that makes sense. I don't really know if I'm using a lot of that characteristics here. I really like the chorus for that kind of feeling. And I feel like that is what I'm doing here with the envelope, yes. So let's have a listen to this sound. We're doing some really cool atonal stuff over here, specifically with the random amplitude, which is like a very precise thing that Vital can do that not any other synth that I've seen can do, or that I have used can do that. We have a modulation on that, and then we also have a modulation on the detune range, which is Where is that? Is that just one of these? No, right? Oscillator 1 detune range. Oh, this guy here, yes. There we are. So this is determining how far all of the individual 16 voices are spread out. And that means that it can be anywhere from 1 semitone to, I believe, 4 octaves is the maximum. And that is what is actually responsible for what you can see with a lot of copying happening over here. So notice that you sometimes get this row of 16 spikes that is like equally spaced. And sometimes they're like really close together. They're almost like causing one spike. That is when the depth amount is at its lowest. And when it's very high, you're going to have one spike, say, over here, and then one over here, and that like 16 spikes up all the way through the frequency spectrum. And of course, sometimes it's not going to show because it gets cut off by some of the stuff over here, or it gets compressed in a certain way, or it gets masked by parts of the delay. But this is what is responsible for that atonality and that kind of almost glassy sound is this, okay, taking 16 copies of a waveform and just spacing it over range equally. So that is also why we have set this to be equal spacing here. And that is why we have set 100% detune, so that it's using the full range that we are setting here, that we are modulating here. And this is something that I just cannot do inside of Serum, or at least I wouldn't know an easy way to do that. And that is why I decided to use Vital here. As I said, the other thing is that I really like the wetness of the sounds of Vital. So specifically, the chorus is a really good sound for these kind of sounds if you want some just extra detail in there. I feel like it does it in a way that the Serum chorus just cannot top. Specifically, I think it has to do with the fact that it uses 16 voices with that. And in order to do that, you would need to have 4 choruses in Serum. And setting up all of that and setting up all of the settings, it's much easier to just make sure that this is set to 16 voices. Because the chorus in Serum, I believe, only does 2 stereo pairs in the actual chorus. It makes 2 copies and then makes 2 stereo pairs out of those copies. So it's adding 4 voices to the sound. The final thing that I'll say is because it is a spectral engine that is at the start of your sound design, this is it has some spectral processing in here. The random amplitude is clearly a spectral thing. Because it has this spectral engine in there, spectral sound design tends to be very detailed and very textured. And that is another quality that I really like getting out of Vital. And that would be another reason why I would open up Vital if I really want something, as I said, micro detailed is what I call it, in that the very small parts of the sound seem to always change. It never seems to be like very stable. It also means that for me, Vital isn't really associated with very precise sound design. So if I, for example, need to make a bass line where I just need to be really precise with my sound design, I wouldn't really go for Vital. Like, for example, as you can see, what I should do here is I should probably turn the smoothing down all the way on these guys because I just want to get steps out of them. And by default, it adds a little bit of smoothing to the LFOs. That is not really that precise. I also have a feeling that for some of the envelopes, I think I've had like 1 or 2 bass patches where it felt like the envelopes weren't 100% precise. So if I want a little bit of imprecision, if I want a little bit of more playful kind of messing around of the sounds, then a very precise sound, doing always the same thing that I tell it to do and doing it exactly that way, then I would go for Vital. And otherwise, if I want that more precision, then Serum would be the better option because I do think Serum is a very precise synth. Another very precise synth, which I think I've definitely not yet used in this project, is Faceplant. The reason why I don't really like to use Faceplant is because I really need to have an idea of what I want to do with Faceplant, because you have to build up the synth yourself. Like, Faceplant opens up without anything in here. You cannot just jump in there and start messing with different knobs and different buttons. You first still have to build the synth. Now, that is really cool if you know exactly what you want to do, and for that it is really powerful, and then I will use it. Like, if I know I need to do some very specific FM setup, I will go in here and I will do whatever setup that I want, right? With whatever amount of oscillators that I want, and go, say, here. I know that I can just add FM to it, whatever I want to do. So this way, going over here, I can do in between oscillators, and I can get to setups really quickly that I wouldn't be able to do in any other synth. Like, already over here, we have 3 different oscillators FMing 1 oscillator. This is not something that you can do in Serum or Vital already. And if I add a 5th, it is probably going to be very unlikely that there's going to be any other soft synth that just allows you to do this and make changes to it and have everything this visual and that kind of stuff. Like I know that there are some specific FM synths that allow you to do this kind of stuff. If you talk about something like Citrus, there I believe you have 6, 7 operators and you can just FM any operator with any operator and just create setups like that. But what you wouldn't be able to do there, for example, is go in with, say, I don't know, a filter, have a filter in here, set it to a bandpass, set it to like a shape like this, for example, and then use that as your next FM operator. So we're not actually going to send this anywhere. We're going to take this output and we're just going to remove it. And what we instead want to do is we just want to use this as an FM modulator. So we click here and then this is going to go to our actual oscillator and this is going to be our actual FM sounds that is going to go to the output. This is not something that you can do in any synth, I think. And of course, there's even more stuff that you can do, say a little bit of distortion before it so that it gets beefed up a little bit. And moving this around, you can see we get some really cool different changes to the waveform, different tonality changes that can be very, very interesting. But in terms of the actual usage for this synth, this is a very specific thing in the sense that I need to know exactly, okay, what do I want to do? What kind of setup do I want to build in order for me to build it from scratch in this kind of modular system? It is really good for that, and I wish that I did it more. But when it comes to creativity, it is a little bit hard to justify if you know that, for example, Serum or Vital can make the sound that you want to make, spending the extra time to build the synth to potentially get something a little bit more interesting or a little bit more tweakable, right? Or just a little bit more complex out of it, if that's not exactly what the sound requires. If you know that you're just going to make, I don't know, let's go for an example here, like a basic squelch, like this guy here. If I know that this is the sound that I want to make, I'm not going to make a custom setup for making sounds like this. I'm just going to open up a synth patch and make this kind of sound in 30 seconds, right? It's one of those sounds where it's really about, okay, making it quickly and then forgetting about it and then moving on. Faceplant really isn't that good for that kind of stuff because, again, it is making synth from scratch. But also, I feel like Faceplant is not really unique in its sound, in the sense that it is also a very precise synth in the same way that Serum is, or at least I like to think of them in the same way. Whereas for Vital, there is still a clear difference in the sound that you're going to get out of Vital versus Serum. And I'm really relating this to Serum because Serum is, of course, my main synth. So that is my main workhorse. That if I don't want to use Serum, there has to be a reason for me not to use Serum. And for Vital, that there is like an actual sound reason to do that. But I feel like for Faceplant, this is not really the case. So out of the 4 instruments that we talked about, Faceplant is definitely the one that I use least. And it's also the one that I use with the most idea of what I want to do beforehand, because it is very, very specific in what it can do for me. Another synth that is very specific in what it can do for me, and one that I always use in every single track nowadays, is going to be Kickdrum. And of course, this is a kick synthesizer. One of the things that has happened is that it has gotten a wavetable editor, and you're going to be able to use it to create wavetables as well. That is a workflow that I want to explore more and more. I should also say there is another thing that I'm using Faceplant for, and that is specifically importing wavetables, because it has a mode where it doesn't change the phases between harmonics whatsoever. So whatever waveform that you're generating, it just completely equally gets imported into the synth. And you can imagine that if I'm designing a certain type of waveform, I want that in the wavetable, and therefore that is really powerful. But as I said, I am therefore exploring a workflow where I'm going to use the wavetable editor in here and all of the parameters in here. I don't want to ruin this kick, so I'm not going to open it. But I'm going to have this workflow where I'm going to be creating wavetables inside of Kickdrum and then exporting them, re-importing them into Faceplant, and then actually saving them as a wavetable. But of course, the main reason why I would use Kickdrum is to create my kicks. And for that, because Kickdrum is such a specific kind of synthesis that we have to do, where you have to be so precise with the details, having a dedicated synth for that is definitely the way to go. For the longest time, I was using Serum to make my kick drums, and everything that I've made with my samples in both the quality kicks pack, this kick pack over here, as well as all of the kicks in my drum pack volume 1, all of these have been made with Serum, and you can definitely tell that there's like, it just has a certain quality to it that I don't like. And being more precise with, for example, where you're able to set these points of pitch and with the points of the envelope and some of the other features that it has, it's just really powerful for Kickdrum creation. And having a dedicated Kickdrum plugin is definitely a must, especially if you're doing stuff like sidetrans. So those are 5 VSTs and how I like to use them. Let me know your list in the comments down below. And make sure that while you're there, you also like the video and that you're subscribed to the channel with bell notifications turned on. Another way to support the channel is to check out my products. There's links for that in the description, or to purchase something from the affiliate links so that I get a little bit of a kickback. So thanks if you do that. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.